A Wicked Woman by Jack London. Presented by Audio Wisdom. Day had broken cold and gray, exceedingly cold and gray, when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail and climbed the high earth bank, where a dim and little-traveled trail led eastward through the fat spruce timberland. It was a steep bank, and he paused for breath at the top, excusing the act to himself by looking at his watch. It was 9 o'clock. There was no sun, nor hint of sun, though there was not a cloud in the sky. It was a clear day, and yet there seemed an intangible pall over the face of things, a subtle gloom that made the day dark, and that was due to the absence of sun. This fact did not worry the man. He was used to the lack of sun. It had been days since he had seen the sun, and he knew that a few more days must pass before that cheerful orb, due south, would just peep above the skyline and dip immediately from view. The man flung a look back along the way he had come. The Yukon lay a mile wide and hidden under 3 feet of ice. On top of this ice were as many feet of snow. It was all pure white, rolling in gentle undulations where the ice jams of the freeze-up had formed. North and south, as far as his eye could see, it was unbroken white, save for a dark hairline that curved and twisted from around the spruce-covered island to the south, and that curved and twisted away into the north, where it disappeared behind another spruce-covered island. This dark hairline was the trail, the main trail, that led south 500 miles to the Chilkoot Pass, Daya, and Saltwater, and that led north 70 miles to Dowson, and still on to the north 1,000 miles to Nulato, and finally to St. Michael on Bering Sea, 1,000 miles and half 1,000 more.
But all this, the mysterious, far-reaching hairline trail, the absence of sun from the sky, the tremendous cold, and the strangeness and weirdness of it all, made no impression on the man. It was not because he was long used to it. He was a newcomer in the land, a Chechaquo, and this was his first winter. The trouble with him was that he was without imagination. He was quick and alert in the things of life, but only in the things and not in the significances. 50 degrees below zero meant 80-odd degrees of frost. Such fact impressed him as being cold and uncomfortable, and that was all. It did not lead him to meditate upon his frailty as a creature of temperature, and upon man's frailty in general, able only to live within certain narrow limits of heat and cold. And from there on, it did not lead him to the conjectural field of immortality and man's place in the universe. 50 degrees below zero stood for a bite of frost that hurt and that must be guarded against by the use of mittens, ear flaps, warm moccasins, and thick socks. 50 degrees below zero was to him just precisely 50 degrees below zero. That there should be anything more to it than that was a thought that never entered his head. As he turned to go on, he spat speculatively. There was a sharp, explosive crackle that startled him. He spat again. And again, in the air, before it could fall to the snow, the spittle crackled. He knew that at 50 below, spittle crackled on the snow, but this spittle had crackled in the air. Undoubtedly, it was colder than 50 below. How much colder, he did not know. But the temperature did not matter. He was bound for the old claim on the left fork of Henderson Creek, where the boys were already. They had come over across the divide from the Indian Creek country, while he had come the roundabout way to take a look at the possibilities of getting logs in the spring from the islands in the Yukon. He would be into camp by 6 o'clock, a bit after dark, it was true, but the boys would be there, a fire would be going, and a hot supper would be ready. As for lunch, he pressed his hand against the protruding bundle under his jacket. It was also under his shirt, wrapped up in a handkerchief and lying against the naked skin. It was the only way to keep the biscuits from freezing. He smiled agreeably to himself as he thought of those biscuits, each cut open and sopped in bacon grease, and each enclosing a generous slice of fried bacon.
He plunged in among the big spruce trees. The trail was faint. A foot of snow had fallen since the last sled had passed over, and he was glad he was without a sled, traveling light. In fact, he carried nothing but the lunch wrapped in the handkerchief. He was surprised, however, at the cold. It certainly was cold, he concluded, as he rubbed his numbed nose and cheekbones with his mittened hand. He was a warm-whiskered man, but the hair on his face did not protect the high cheekbones and the eager nose that thrust itself aggressively into the frosty air. At the man's heels trotted a dog, a big native husky, the proper wolf dog, gray-coated and without any visible or temperamental difference from its brother, the wild wolf. The animal was depressed by the tremendous cold. It knew that it was no time for traveling. Its instinct told it a truer tale than was told to the man by the man's judgment. In reality, it was not merely colder than 50 below, it was colder than 60 below, than 70 below. It was 75 below zero. Since the freezing point is 32 above zero, it meant that 107 degrees of frost obtained. The man did not know anything about thermometers. Possibly in its brain there was no sharp consciousness of a condition of very cold, such as was in the man's brain. But the brute had its instinct. It experienced a vague but menacing apprehension that subdued it and made it slink along at the man's heels, and that made it question eagerly every unwonted movement of the man, as if expecting him to go into camp or to seek shelter somewhere and build a fire. The dog had learned fire, and it wanted fire, or else to burrow under the snow and cuddle its warmth away from the air. The frozen moisture of its breathing had settled on its fur in a fine powder of frost, and especially were its jowls, muzzle, and eyelashes whitened by its crystalled breath. The man's red beard and mustache were likewise frosted, but more solidly, the deposit taking the form of ice and increasing with every warm, moist breath he exhaled. Also, the man was chewing tobacco, and the muzzle of ice held his lips so rigidly that he was unable to clear his chin when he expelled the juice. The result was that a crystal beard of the color and solidity of amber was increasing its length on his chin. If he fell down, it would shatter itself like glass into brittle fragments. But he did not mind the appendage. It was the penalty all tobacco chewers paid in that country, and he had been out before in 2 cold snaps. They had not been so cold as this, he knew, but by the spirit thermometer at 60 mile, he knew they had been registered at 50 below and at 55. He held on through the level stretch of woods for several miles, crossed a wide flat of niggerheads, and dropped down a bank to the frozen bed of a small stream. This was Henderson Creek, and he knew he was 10 miles from the forks. He looked at his watch. It was 10 o'clock. He was making 4 miles an hour, and he calculated that he would arrive at the forks at 12:30. He decided to celebrate that event by eating his lunch there. The dog dropped in again at his heels, with a tail drooping discouragement, as the man swung along the creek bed. The furrow of the old sled trail was plainly visible, but a dozen inches of snow covered the marks of the last runners. In a month, no man had come up or down this silent creek. The man held steadily on. He was not much given to thinking, and just then particularly he had nothing to think about, save that he would eat lunch at the forks and that at 6 o'clock he would be in camp with the boys. There was nobody to talk to, and, had there been, speech would have been impossible because of the ice muzzle on his mouth. So he continued monotonously to chew tobacco and to increase the length of his amber beard. Once in a while the thought reiterated itself that it was very cold, and that he had never experienced such cold. As he walked along, he rubbed his cheekbones and nose with the back of his mittened hand. He did this automatically, now and again changing hands. But rub as he would, the instant he stopped, his cheekbones went numb, and the following instant the end of his nose went numb. He was sure to frost his cheeks, he knew that, and experienced a pang of regret that he had not devised a nose strap of the sort Bud wore in cold snaps. Such a strap passed across the cheeks as well and saved them. But it didn't matter much, after all. What were frosted cheeks? A bit painful, that was all. They were never serious. Empty as the man's mind was of thoughts, he was keenly observant, and he noticed the changes in the creek, the curves and bends and timber jams, and always he sharply noted where he placed his feet. Once, coming around a bend, he shied abruptly like a startled horse, curved away from the place where he had been walking, and retreated several paces back along the trail. The creek, he knew, was frozen clear to the bottom. No creek could contain water in that Arctic winter. But he knew also that there were springs that bubbled out from the hillsides and ran along under the snow and on top the ice of the creek. He knew that the coldest snaps never froze these springs, and he knew likewise their danger. They were traps. They hid pools of water under the snow that might be 3 inches deep or 3 feet. Sometimes a skin of ice half an inch thick covered them, and in turn was covered by the snow. Sometimes there were alternate layers of water and ice skin, so that when one broke through, he kept on breaking through for a while, sometimes wetting himself to the waist. That was why he had shied in such panic. He had felt the give under his feet and heard the crackle of a snow-hidden ice skin. And to get his feet wet in such a temperature meant trouble and danger. At the very least, it meant delay, for he would be forced to stop and build a fire, and under its protection to bare his feet while he dried his socks and moccasins. He stood and studied the creek bed and its banks, and decided that the flow of water came from the right. He reflected a while, rubbing his nose and cheeks, then skirted to the left, stepping gingerly and testing the footing for each step. Once clear of the danger, he took a fresh chew of tobacco and swung along at his 4-mile gait. And all the time the dog ran with him at his heels. At first it kept close behind, as if fearful of the man, but gradually it relaxed and ran alongside him. It was not a dog to run wild, and its instincts were of the primitive sort. It knew no fear of man, but it knew fear of cold. It sensed the danger of the cold. It did not know why the cold was dangerous, but it knew that it was dangerous. The man, on the other hand, did not sense the danger. He was comfortable and he was confident. He had confidence in himself. He believed he could overcome any obstacle that might arise. He believed he could endure whatever the cold might bring. The dog did not share this belief. Its instinct told it that this was no time for traveling. It wanted to stop, to crawl under the snow, to curl itself into a ball and sleep. But it followed the man, because the man was the fire provider and the food provider. It was dependent upon the man, and it obeyed. The man was not troubled by the dog's uneasiness. He was not aware of it. He did not notice the apprehension in the dog's movements, nor the way it questioned every movement he made. He went steadily on, thinking only of the camp ahead and the hot supper that awaited him there. He was not alarmed. He had no fear. He had never known fear. And so he walked on, through the silent woods, with the dog trotting at his heels, while the cold grew ever colder and the day grew slowly darker. At 12 o'clock, the day was at its brightest, yet the sun was absent from the sky. The man looked at his watch. It was 12 o'clock. He was glad. He felt no hunger, but he was content to eat his lunch because it was lunchtime. He sat down on a snow-covered log to eat. The frost had so bitten into his fingers that he had trouble in separating them. He drew off his mittens with his teeth and thawed his fingers by thrusting them into his armpits. This accomplished, he sat down on the log and proceeded to eat his lunch. The dog sat close to him and watched him eagerly, expecting food, but the man fed it no morsel. The dog was disappointed, but it made no protest. It knew the man and trusted him. It knew that food would come later. When the man had finished eating, he stood up and started on. The dog followed. The trail was well marked now, and the man went confidently. But suddenly he broke through. There was no warning. One step, and the next he was through the ice into the water. It was a surprise. He plunged into water that was not more than knee-deep. He scrambled out on the instant, but he knew he was in trouble. He knew that he must build a fire, at once, without delay. His feet were wet, the cold bit deeper, and the danger was real. He did not panic. He was not alarmed. This was not the first time he had been wet to the knees. He had been wet to the waist many times. He knew that a fire was necessary, and he proceeded to build one. With unusual care, he chose a spot under a clump of small spruce trees. Here was no danger that a sudden gust of wind would extinguish the fire. Here the snow was not so deep, and here there was plenty of fuel. The man pulled off his mittens. His fingers were numb, but he worked slowly and carefully. He broke twigs from the dead wood. He gathered dry grass and moss. He placed the twigs carefully. He knew that no time must be lost. He lighted the fire. It flamed up cheerfully. He fed it with dry wood. Soon the fire was blazing. He was safe, for the time being. The dog lay down in the snow close to the fire. It was warm. The man began to dry his moccasins. He pulled them off. He laid them near the fire. Steam rose from them. The fire crackled. The flames danced. The man was content. But then a mishap occurred. High up in the tree above him was a load of snow. It fell. It fell upon the fire. The fire was blotted out. The man stared at it. The flames were gone. The smoke was gone. Only ashes remained. He knew what had happened. He was calm, but he was afraid. The fear made him forget himself. He rushed about wildly, looking for matches, but the fear made him hurry too much. He stumbled over the dog and fell down. The matches were spilled upon the snow. He tried to pick them up, but his fingers were numb. They would not close. He gathered the matches with his hands, but he dropped them again. He tried to light one. The match flared up. He burned his fingers. The pain made him cry out, but he held the match. It went out. He tried another. It flamed. Again he burned his fingers. Again the match went out. Then he dropped the whole bunch of matches upon the snow. They scattered. He watched them. There were many, but his fingers were useless. He could not pick them up. He knew what that meant. He knew that he could not build a fire. He knew that he would freeze to death. The thought of death came to him calmly. It was not a panicky thought. He had known for a long time that he was going to freeze. Now he knew it for certain. He sat down in the snow. The dog came and sniffed at him. The man spoke to the dog. "All right, old fellow," he said. "I'm going to die." He pulled his mittens from his hands. His fingers were frozen. They were white. He looked at them curiously. They seemed strange. He beat them against his legs. There was no feeling. He beat them harder. Still, there was no feeling. He was losing control of his body. His thoughts became slower. He was no longer afraid. He felt sleepy, very sleepy. The idea of sitting down and resting seemed pleasant, extremely pleasant. He sat there, without moving. The dog lay down near him. It was uneasy. It knew something was wrong, but it did not know what. The man was sinking into a stupor. He had forgotten the dog. He had forgotten the cold. He was no longer afraid. He felt warm, very warm. This feeling was pleasant. It was comforting. He closed his eyes. He dreamed. He dreamed of the boys at home. He dreamed of warm rooms and of blazing fires. The cold no longer troubled him. The cold no longer existed. He slipped deeper and deeper into sleep. It was easy now, very easy. The pain was gone. The struggle was over. He was at peace. He did not move. He did not stir. He lay quietly in the snow. The dog watched him. The dog waited. But the man did not rise. He did not speak. He did not move again. Then the man drowsed off into what seemed to him the most comfortable and satisfying sleep he had ever known. The dog turned and trotted up the trail in the direction of the camp it knew, where were the other food providers and fire providers.